Hello and welcome to episode 35 of Triumph Beyond Trauma. I'm so grateful to have you here with me today. As we approach the holiday season, it is a great time to reflect on how far you've come this year and to set yourself up for a stronger, more empowered future. Imagine stepping into the weeks and year ahead feeling calmer, more balanced, and in control of your recovery journey. That's exactly what the First Responder Mental Wellness Method is designed to help you achieve. This self paced, online, and completely private program offers tactical yoga, breathwork, and mindfulness strategies tailored to reduce stress, improve sleep, and to help you feel more present in your day to day life. Participants are experiencing incredible changes, not just in how they feel, but how they approach their recovery. Some have even started discussions with their treatment teams about reducing medications, which is just extraordinary. If you're ready to prioritize your well-being during this busy time, visit tacticalyogaaustralia.com and take that first step today. Now, onto today's episode. I am so excited to share this conversation with an incredible woman, my very good friend, Cheryl Leung, better known as Cheungy. If you're looking for inspiration, resilience, and a journey that will move you, then you are in the right place, my friends. Cheungy and I first crossed paths in 2015 on our weapons instructors course, and we connected instantly. We were both just a couple of down to earth, hardworking chicks there to train, have some fun, and maybe stir up a bit of mischief. After hours nerve force? Check. Throwing each other around the mat room? Definitely. Many Peronis? Absolutely. Those memories are still some of my favorites, and they cemented a friendship that has lasted to this day. I've always believed that the right people come into your life when you need them most, and Cheungy has been one of those people for me. Her strength, humor, and light have been such a gift, and I am so honored to share her journey with you today. That said, this is going to be more than just a lighthearted chat between two old friends. We are laughing and crying together, we swear a little bit, and we dive into some deeply emotional topics, including suicidal ideation, PTSD, grief, and loss. Please take this as a content warning. If today's not the day for you to listen to this episode, please come back to it at another time when you feel comfortable to do so. Finally, I want to thank Cheryl for being so open and honest, for sharing her incredible journey, and for talking about her partner, Tony McCann, and their life together. This conversation is an absolute gift, and I truly hope it reaches someone who needs it today. Welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma, the podcast that explores journeys of resilience and hope. I'm Rosie a yoga and breathwork teacher and founder of Tactical Yoga Australia. As a former soldier's wife, mum to 3 beautiful kids, and a medically retired New South Wales police officer with PTSD, I understand the challenges of navigating mental health in the first responder and veteran community. Join us for incredible stories from individuals who've confronted the depths of mental illness and discovered their path to happiness and purpose, as well as solo episodes and expert discussions. Together, we'll uncover the tools to help you navigate your journey toward a brighter, more fulfilling life. Whether you're looking for helpful insights, practical tips, or just a friendly reminder that you're not alone, Triumph Beyond Trauma has got your back. You matter, and your journey to a happier, more meaningful life starts right here. Cheryl, welcome to Triumph Beyond Trauma. I always say it's a pleasure to have my guests, but it's such a pleasure to have you because you're one of my most favorite people in the whole wide world. You always make me laugh and smile, and I can't wait to have this chat with you today.
Thanks, Rosie. Thanks so much for having me today. It's been a minute since we've seen each other.
It has. So we usually just start at the start. Let's start with where you were born and where you grew up and like your whole family life as a kid.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Melbourne and I moved to Central West New South Wales when I was a wee thing. I was about 18 months old. And I grew up in a really small farming community. I loved my childhood and I wouldn't have changed it for the world. I moved to Sydney when I was 18, and then I worked in hospitality in different, hotels and establishments around the city. spent some time in Queensland on an island before I came back to Sydney, and I eventually joined the police in 2009. I was sent straight to Mount Druitt, where I spent 10 years in GDs. And for anyone who doesn't know, Mount Druitt's it's in Western Sydney, and it is low socioeconomic, low education, high unemployment, and largely housing commission. It was a pretty tough area to police,
It's
and
like
it had
it's like the perfect conditions for crime, right? Like
perfect.
it ticked all the boxes.
Exactly. If there was a checklist, they'd all be ticked.
Yeah.
The crime rate was really high, but it was a great learning station, and I loved my time there. I had like the best team. We had so much fun, and the camaraderie throughout the whole station as a whole was second to none. It's also where I met my partner, Tony, and he's like really intertwined into this journey. Um, and I think, Rosie, I met you in about 2015-ish.
Yeah.
Is
Nearly
that
10 years
right?
ago. I can't believe it.
I know. We were such babies then.
I know.
We spent 9 weeks together down at Goulburn on the OFI course.
I think just some of the best days. So good. I actually really love thinking about that course. It was a lot of fun. Do you want to go back a
I was,
bit? Oh no,
yeah,
why did you join the cops?
don't ask me that because I joined as a joke.
Oh, did you? Yes, well, this is great. Let's hear it.
Really?
Yeah, I want to know.
Right. So I ended up joining the police because my partner at the time, he was in the police, and he kept saying to me, "Oh, you'd be really good in the cops, blah blah blah." And I was still working in hospitality, and one night I had the most terrible night of my life. Like, people were just abusing me. It was a Friday night, and I went home and I cracked it. And I went on to the police website and got them to send me an application form. And
Yeah.
so I filled it in and thinking, oh, I'm never going to get in. And then they invited me to their psychometric testing and PT testing. And so I went, and I still thought, oh, I'm never going to get in. And then the next thing it was, come on down to Goulburn. And then next thing I was down at Goulburn, becoming a police officer.
Isn't it funny, like going from hospitality where you're like, people are the worst. Like, I'm going to do a job that, like policing, because that'll be so much
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Because I don't have to deal with anybody I'm not going to like.
Ever. Oh, it's so funny. Oh, all right, let's go back.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your early days in Mount Druitt. Like, where were you living in Sydney before you joined the cops? Were you living in that area, like around there in the west, or?
No, I was living sort of southwest Sydney. So maybe I lived probably about 20 minutes away from Mount Druitt, half hour. And I was living with my ex at the time. Yeah.
Yeah. How was the crew at Mount Druitt? Because sometimes in those real busy stations, the crew can be good because you're so busy and everyone's got to support each other. And sometimes they're not. How was it for you?
We had, like, my actual team was fantastic. We used to have the best team. Everybody wanted to be on it.
Yeah.
We used to have team nights all the time, and just as a whole, the station was fantastic. Like, I don't really think there was a lot of dramas in the beginning, and everyone just knuckled down and did what they had to do.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
We also had a really great commander when I first started, so that made a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. So things changed then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they did.
Yeah. So what happened?
Hang on, what happened in
Yeah,
the
like
incident, or
in
what
the
happened with the
station. No,
station?
let's talk about the station first.
Yeah, okay, cool. After our first commander, or the first commander that was there when I started, there was people who caused a few issues and made a few complaints that upended the whole station and caused a lot of infighting. And it was almost like you had to pick a side.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it was yeah.
Yeah. That sucks.
You know what that's like.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, and how far into your career was that? Were you still pretty junior?
I was probably 7 or 8 years in at this stage.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what time, because we went down to do our OSI course together in 2015, like you said. So how long had you been in when you decided to do that?
I had applied, I think, in early 2014 to do it, and I don't know whether I didn't get on the course in 2014 for some reason. I can't remember why.
Yeah, I
I
think,
think it was something to do with staffing, or I don't know whether it was staffing with um, the weapons unit or whether it was staffing at the station.
yeah, it was pretty tricky to get into those courses at the time. And I'm pretty sure ours was the last one they ran for ages, wasn't it? Because they did the active armed defender
AAO.
training after that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what drew you to weapons training?
I have a bit of a background in martial arts, and I really loved doing like the death tax side of things. So I wanted to be part of that.
I think when you got a background like that too, you just want to make sure other people are doing it right as well. You know,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think,
definitely.
yeah. So when did you get together with Tony?
Don't ask that question.
Oh, okay. Is that a little bit sounds saucy?
We were together when we did the OSI course, Rosie.
Oh, were you really? Such a cheeky guy. So you guys were together for a while then?
Yeah, we were together for about 9 years.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know. So let's talk about what happened in 2018 and what happened with work and all the things that happened there. And
Yeah, sure. So I was in GDs, and so we did a roster that was 4 days on and 6 days off. And in my 6 days off in June of 2018, I had 5 people in my personal life pass away, and that was from like cancer, heart failure, and there was a SIDS death. And for whatever reason, I just thought, oh, I'm just going to go back to work because there's really not a lot I can do about this, right? So I went to work, and for that block, I was supervising. And on one of the night shifts, I was 14, meaning I was the mobile supervisor out on the road, and I was in the car by myself. And early in the shift, radio called a job for a 50-year-old male in cardiac arrest. And I didn't pay much attention to the address. I was just really like focused on getting there, you know? And when I rolled up to the house, I went, oh, shit, it's this house. And the paramedics were already there on scene. And I ran into the house, and laid out on the floor was one of our like, really well-known drug dealers. And in that split second, I remember thinking to myself, why are we trying to save this bloke?
yeah.
And I said to the paramedics, like, what do you want me to do? And they said, can you just do the next round of compressions? And they were setting up the defib. And so they did all of that. And for the next 2 minutes, I pumped that guy's chest like my life depended on it. And I remember looking up, and I saw his family standing there watching. And the paramedics, they did take him to hospital, and he passed away. And I remember walking out onto the veranda and saying to another constable, of all the effing people I could have saved this week, it was this effing C, because in that moment, nothing aligned with my values or my moral compass. Because in my mind, this guy had ruined so many lives. And yet here I was trying to save him. And I call that my catalyst incident. And I didn't realize at that in that moment how significant that 2 minutes of my life was going to be. And I didn't realize how significant the moral injury it was going to be.
Yeah, like, I can't even imagine that, like, as soon as you said that, like, your moral compass is definitely going to be like, "What do I do here?" Because I don't wanna look after this person especially when you've just lost 5 loved ones of yours,
Mm.
and you know that this person's just, like, not doing a great thing with his life.
Yeah, not a great human.
No, and,
Not a great human.
you know, I've done a lot of deep work into people, and everyone's life is important and all that sort of stuff, but sometimes you're allowed to think those things as well. So what happened from there? Did you just go back on shift? Did you go home?
No, well, that was the start of the shift. It was really, really quite early. And so we just went about our business. We obviously, did the usual stuff for a deceased, and we just, I just wandered off to the next job like you normally do in
Yeah,
GDs.
yeah.
Um, it was probably a couple of months later, I think I started having like flashbacks and nightmares. I think that's how it starts for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, of that one particular, job or just other jobs that you'd been to as well?
Mainly this one particular job.
Yeah.
And not long after that, like I would drive to work, and I would drive usually the same way. And I would pull onto this particular street. And as I pulled onto the street, I would start to cry. And I was so mean to myself. Like I'd say, you know what, you can cry until you get to the shops, and
Yeah, that's
the,
all you're
the
allowed.
shops were like, yeah, it's like 2 or 3 Ks. You can cry for that 2 or 3 Ks.
Yeah.
And I'd get to the shops and I'd say, right, get it together because you're going to work. And I'd stop crying when I get to the shops. And I'd finish driving to work and I pull up in the car park and I take this big deep breath in, and I'd get out of the car and I'd wander in to the change rooms, and my locker was like right over the back in the very back corner. And I put my uniform on, and I had this weird little ritual where I'd put my uniform on and I'd close the door and I'd knock on it and I'd say, like out loud, you know, game on. And looking back on that now, that was me putting on my mask and going from, that girl crying in the car on the way to work to being that professional police officer with no emotions, and I'm untouchable.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that too. Like, I wasn't knocking on the door and yelling, but I did, like, I always thought, and I've talked about it before, putting on my police shirt was, like, definitely game on, and then taking it off again was me just being Rosie again. And I did that for such a long time, and I still don't know why I stopped doing it. I think when we moved to Walgett, like, it was pretty acceptable that you're a police officer, so you didn't have to get changed at the station because you only lived about a minute and a half from it.
Yeah.
So that's probably where that changed, but I think that's pretty powerful to do that. Do you know why you started,
Yeah.
or it was something that you did?
It was just something I did, and I don't even know when it started, to be honest. Like it just was something that I would automatically do.
Yeah. My psych talks a lot about armor on, armor off, and I think that's what it is, isn't it? It's
Mm.
like putting on some sort
Yeah.
of armor, like a little shield that protects you from all the shit you're about to, like, see and have to deal with.
Yeah. And I think like you've spoken about it in a few of your episodes about how you present really well.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that is definitely part of it, like putting on that mask and being able to mimic and mask your emotions and other people's actions.
Yeah. Yeah, presenting really well, sometimes to my own detriment, that I don't even believe what's going on, I think. Yeah.
Oh,
O
yeah.
yeah.
I'll come back to that later.
Yeah, I think we will later, yeah, for sure. So, you said it was a few months until you sort of twigged that things weren't going real well for you, but it was subtle, right?
Yeah, it was really subtle, and I don't even think I realized what was happening at the time. I I do remember thinking to myself, like, "Just get over it, like, seriously, you need to move on, like, just suck it up."
Mm,
And to be honest with you, nobody knew what was going on, like, I never let on to Tony, I never let on to any of my friends that any of this was going on, because I honestly thought at the time, like, "Ugh, this is just a phase, I'll get over it."
yeah. And also, we didn't talk about it much then either. The literacy of what's
No.
like, there's nothing there for us.
Oh, I have learnt so much in the last 5 years, it's phenomenal,
Yeah.
and if I knew then what I knew now, it'd be a different story.
Wouldn't it just be so much easier, right, to navigate if we had all the knowledge that we do now?
Wishful thinking.
Mm. Anyway, so what happened? How did it come about for you?
Yeah, so it was February of 2019, I went on leave, and Tony and I went on this amazing road trip. We went, down the south coast of New South Wales, and we just stopped off wherever we wanted. We were having pizza and beers on the beach, watching the sunset, and sand in our toes and the smell of the salt air. It was fantastic. We went all the way down to Port Fairy in Victoria. We did the Great Ocean Road, and for anyone who does the Great Ocean Road, the Bay of Martyrs is by far my favourite place. But on the way back, we were driving and we were coming up the Hume Highway, and we got to Pheasant's Nest. And Tony looked at me and he goes, "Do you feel relaxed?" And I could feel the anxiety building in me. And it was ridiculous because I still had a week off work. And I just looked at him and I said, "No, not really." And then we got home and we unpacked the car and stuff. And I sat on the floor in the lounge room and I just started crying. And I mean, like proper sobbing, like it sounded like a whale. And Tony couldn't get anything out of me for ages. Like he thought we were breaking up. He thought I was leaving. He thought I was mad at the kids. And after, I don't know, hours of crying, all I could say to him was, "I'm so angry I did CPR on that guy." And looking back on it now, I think there were two parts to it. There was, the anger and the shame that I had tried to save this person who I had deemed a bit of a low life. But there was also a real feeling of guilt that in his last moments, I couldn't show him any compassion, and I wasn't I wasn't able to be empathetic with his family when they were at their lowest. So Tony sent me to the doctor the next day, and that's when I went off work. I got referred to, a psychologist and a psychiatrist. And a few months later, my stepson moved in with us full time. So I had this 15-year-old boy now living in my house full time. And so I was trying to juggle this new diagnosis and having a teenage boy in my face all day.
Yeah.
And it was rough. It was rough in the beginning. I I said and did some things that I'm really not very proud of. And one day I just thought to myself, like, "Shit, man, you're the adult here. Like, you've got to make the effort." So I sat down with him one night at dinner, and Tony was at work, so it was just me and my stepson. And I was just honest with him. I just said, like, this is what I'm going through. I'm really sorry I'm not used to having you in the house. And, you know, like, I'm just really sorry for my behavior. So we now have a really, really beautiful relationship, and I'm really fortunate to have him in my life.
How did that conversation go from with him? Did he, as a 15-year-old boy, I have a 13, almost 14-year-old boy, it's pretty understanding. So how did he go with it at 15?
He was really good about it.
Yeah.
He's very emotionally mature in some way. And he was really understanding about it. And we actually, that night, we had quite a deep conversation about what we were both trying to deal with at the
Yeah.
time.
That's beautiful. So after that conversation that you had with him, did that help you within the house then, and to do what you needed to do in relation to your PTSD? And you
Yeah, it made it, I think, because before we'd had that conversation, I hadn't really spoken to him about what I was going through. So he was obviously adjusting to coming into our household as well.
mm,
So I think it just helped him understand why I was maybe being irrational sometimes and flying off the handle.
yeah. Yeah. All right. So you saw the GP and they wrote your certificate.
Yep. Yep.
Did you go back at all after that first certificate?
No, no, I genuinely thought for about the first, oh, maybe 18 months that I was going back to work. I genuinely thought, like, oh, I just need to get some coping mechanisms and I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And one day I woke up and went, oh, fuck that. Like, no way.
I know, I was in full denial, but mine didn't last very long. I went into my first psych appointment going, I'm never going back, I can't go back. And then after a couple of weeks of seeing her, I was like, maybe I could go back. And she's like, what are you talking about? I thought you weren't going back. I'm like, I just don't know. And then like the next appointment, I was like, no, I'm definitely not going back. And she's like, okay, are we clear now? I'm like, yeah, I've made the decision. I can't go back. I'm done. Yeah.
Well, I walk into my psychiatrist's office and I just looked at him and I said, well, I can't go back there. I'm not going back. And he just looked at me and he's this wee little man, right? And he just says to me so softly, he was like, yeah, I know, but you had to come to that decision, right? And I was like, this guy, like this guy.
So funny. Yeah. Oh, you knew this whole time?
Why didn't you just say, like, God, make me wait 18 months to work
Yeah.
this out?
Yeah. So yeah, you got your certificate, and then how did you go with your psychology stuff? Did you find a good psychologist straight away? Because it can be tricky.
It can be really tricky. And so when I first went off, I was really fortunate. I found a psychologist that I really clicked with. And I have been seeing him for the past 5 years, and I will probably see him for the rest of my natural life, to be honest, or bugger. But also during like this whole journey, there have been other psychologists that have come with like, or because I've been on a course or as part of a course, I've seen other psychologists along with that as well.
Yeah. But still got that main guy.
Yeah.
So you did some EMDR, eye movement
Yeah.
desensitization and reprocessing. So for people that don't really
Yeah.
know, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening that don't, what is EMDR? What does that involve?
So EMDR, you it's to mimic, like, so you'll talk about your trauma
Yeah.
and you'll get to a point and they might ask you, like, where do you feel it in your body? Like, what does it feel like? Like, I feel it in my chest and it's really heavy. It feels hot, that sort of thing. And then you might follow their finger or the end of a pen, and they'll like wave it in front of your eyes, and you just watch it with your eyes. And that is supposed to mimic like your REM sleep cycle to try and process that memory.
So interesting, isn't it?
It is very interesting. It was extremely exhausting, and I used to come home very tired and very cranky, and Tony would send me to bed every Friday afternoon.
Go. Yeah. I remember talking to you in those very early days. I think you must have been at your very
Yeah,
first psychologist when we're like, I'm about to go in. I'm like, oh, and then we spoke afterwards and you're like, I am exhausted. I'm like, yeah, it's fully exhausting. I had forgotten at that
yeah,
time how exhausting those
yeah,
first appointments are because it's such a lot.
yeah.
Mm, yeah.
It really is. That EMDR also, it was almost like it unlocked Pandora's box, because I had gone in thinking, oh, this is my one trauma, this is my catalyst, and this is my
Yep.
one trauma that has filled my bucket and I'm overflowing. And then I go into the EMDR and all of these other things start flying out. And I'm like, well, I thought I dealt with this. Like, I thought I was over you, you know?
Yeah. And then here they all are.
Yeah, just sitting there looking at me. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Wow.
So this brings us to about the start of 2020. So January 2020, I had surgery on my wrist for a physical injury that I got in the police. And so then had started rehabbing that as well as my psychological injury. And then a month later in February, Tony was diagnosed with a rare form of blood cancer called multiple myeloma. And we had actually thought that he had ruptured a disc in his spine. And so this diagnosis of cancer was like totally left field.
So
And
he just
then,
had like, sorry, he just had a sore back. Is that how?
yeah, so he had this really sore back for a little while, and he'd been going to the physio, and it got to the point where you could actually see a lump, like
Oh, yeah.
just sort of just between his shoulder blade and his spine. And we that's why we thought it was a ruptured disc or something. And then when he had scans, he actually had MRIs about 5 months apart, and the one in October showed nothing, and the one in February showed a 5 centimeter tumor
Wow.
on the back of his rib there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So, we had to tell his family, and telling his kids was really hard. Like, we had literally found out that day, and we sat down with the kids at lunchtime because Tony was going into hospital that afternoon to have all of these tests run. And so we were in shock, and we were trying to tell them, and they're in shock. And so all of a sudden, my mask went back on, and I was terrified and angry, but I had to like put on this really positive face of, it's going to be okay. Like, there's heaps of treatments out there, and they're always bringing out new treatment, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a really difficult time.
So how did the kids go?
Oh.
What was their, like, obviously, how old were they?
So my stepson, he was 16 at the time, and my stepdaughter, she was 20.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're definitely old enough to understand that it's not real good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And they're two really different people. And I remember my stepson just froze, and my stepdaughter, she started crying, and she didn't know where to turn. She literally did not know where to turn. She didn't know whether she wanted to turn to Tony and hug him, or turn to and hug him. And it was just this really weird situation where nobody knew what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Did they come to the hospital for the testing and everything, or that afternoon?
So Tony, yeah, so Tony, it was probably half an hour after we told the kids, the hospital rang and said, we've got a bed for you. And so I ran around just throwing stuff into a bag, like, dude, we've got to get up there. And he was in hospital, I think, maybe for 3 or 4 days, just getting because of the because of the type of cancer it was, a lot of the markers are in his urine, was in his urine.
Oh, right.
So he had to do like a 24-hour urine test as well as bloods and a bone marrow biopsy.
Yeah. So intense.
Yeah.
So you had your mask on and you're going to the hospital to see him and you're dealing with the kids. How did that go for you?
Yeah. It was hard. It was really hard because like I'm still trying to deal with the psychological injury, the work trauma over here. And then I'm trying to juggle everybody's emotions here as well as, just running the house just day to day, that sort of thing. And, the insurance company, I think, felt bad about cutting me off from that EMDR course and put me onto a trauma course at St John of God at Burwood. And so it was a group course. And it was the first group course I did. And it was really confronting because you went into this group and there was 12 of us. And I don't think any of us really knew each other. And the next thing, we're all sharing our traumas from work and then sitting there and validating each other and discussing the emotions that we're all feeling and why we're feeling them, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
I think group therapy, I think, has its place.
Yeah.
And I think that I think the one thing I learned from group therapy is that you just have to keep a really open mind because
Yeah.
there's always, there's always this nugget of wisdom that's going to come out of somebody. And it might not be the facilitator. It's sometimes like, Joe Blow who's in your group and they say something wild and you go, oh, well, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
Where did that come from,
Yeah.
Or sometimes, your brain finally starts working and it puts 2 and 2 together and the cogs finally click and you go, oh, well, that makes sense.
The little light comes on. You're like, ah.
Ding.
Yeah. So how long? So 2 days a week. How long was that one for then?
It was a 12-week course and
Yeah.
it was quite intense. Yeah. I was on that when I think COVID started as well. And things at that point, things hadn't shut down. But COVID was sort of just beginning. And that's when Tony had to go in for his stem cell transplant.
Okay.
And he went in, and the following day they gave him this dose of chemo, Malphilan, and it wipes everything out in your body. And then they reintroduced his stem cells back into him the following day. And I spent pretty much all of my free time with him up at hospital. And he hit rock bottom on about day 5 and he was so sick. Like he wouldn't let them bring any food into the room because it would make him more nauseous. And he would make me take the slice of bread off and eat half so it looked like he had eaten something.
Oh.
And he didn't want to drink or anything, and he didn't really want to even get out of bed. And I think for me, that's when I went, oh shit, this cancer thing is for real. Like, it's for real. And this thing happened in my brain where I call it pre-grief grief, because realized that it was real, and I realized what the outcome was going to be. And so I started to grieve, even though he was still here. I started to grieve the loss of Tony and our future together and all of the plans that we had made for, decades.
Yeah.
Like, I suddenly went, oh, shit, what if this doesn't happen?
What was the prognosis at that time
So multiple myeloma is terminal
from the diagnosis?
from
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Um, so life expectancy is around about 5 years.
so you already knew that at some point
Yeah,
he was going to pass away from this.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but I also, in my brain, had been like, oh, he's strong and young and fit and he'll be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a few weeks later, we got the results of his stem cell transplant, and they weren't perfect, but they were pretty good. The medical team, they decided that he was okay to go on to a maintenance program. And my course at St. John of God finished up, and lockdown happened. So this house was basically in complete lockdown. We didn't see anyone. We didn't go anywhere because Tony was so paranoid about getting COVID.
Yeah, for sure.
And I remember sitting there thinking, man, I wish that course was on, because it was the one time where I could just unleash,
Yeah.
unleash all of my emotions and not give a shit. And then we fast forward to like February of 21, and I was medically discharged from the police. And, everybody talks about that loss of identity. And I don't think I realized how much I was going to grieve for the end of that chapter of my life.
Yeah.
I don't know if you went through the same thing, Rosie, but I thought I was going to be a cop until I was 60, and I thought I was going to be, that crusty senior constable sitting in the back of the office growling at everybody that walked past.
Yeah. I definitely felt robbed of a career that I thought too would take me a little bit further than it did, and definitely into retirement. So yeah, I felt that too.
That's a really good way of describing it. Yeah. I did feel robbed.
Yeah.
And, I don't know about you, but I lost contact with a lot of people, and I really missed like the adrenaline rush of going to jobs, and it was just this weird state of limbo that I found myself in, I guess. Not long after that, Tony's first treatment failed, and we had to go back to the medical team and reassess. He started the second protocol, and he had to have surgery to remove a tumor. He didn't stay on that second protocol for very long, and he moved on to a third protocol, the daratumumab, which had just come onto the PBS. And it was around this time that one of our work colleagues took their own life, and that had like a huge impact on both of us. Like, we had worked with this guy for a number of years. And for me, I'd had some suicidal ideations throughout this whole thing, and I'd never acted on them, but I sat there and I really felt for our friend, and I thought, far out, like, those voices must have been so loud. And, I get it. Sometimes you would just do anything to make them quiet. And Tony was really confused about it,
Yeah.
because, and he I remember he was really upset, and he just said to me, he said, "I don't get it. Like, I'm fighting for my life." And those words, that it sort of changed my mindset in that moment.
In relation to your own suicidal ideation or just in
Yeah.
general? Yeah.
It changed my perspective on suicidal ideations, because I thought, oh yeah, that I could understand why Tony would be upset about somebody taking their own life when he's going through all of this stuff. So
Yeah.
it did change me a little bit. Um, the third protocol that Tony was on, it ended because it failed and the cancer was coming back again. And
Can I just
his
ask,
medical team were, yeah.
what are the protocols? Are they stem cell transplants, or is that they're different types of treatment, or what is that?
Oh, sorry. So the protocols are different types of treatment. So
Okay.
you might have like a specific chemo that pairs up with another drug, or
Okay.
an immunotherapy that pairs up with something else, and they're pretty stock standard. Like, they come as a package
Okay.
almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Tony's medical team, they got him onto a clinical trial for the Lantamab, which was being run out of Liverpool Hospital. And so for us, that just meant that we had to travel a little bit more, and there was a lot of tests that were involved in that. So he had to do a lot of like blood tests and urine samples and bone marrow biopsies. And there were a lot of eye scans and body scans that he had to do regularly. It was really fascinating to watch how a clinical trial works
Yeah.
and how much money is poured into it. Like, it's just phenomenal. But it was also really terrifying, because you don't go onto a clinical trial unless it's getting a bit dire.
Yeah.
And I think he was only on the clinical trial for 2 months, or maybe a little bit longer. And the team decided that it wasn't working. And he'd also, during this time, he'd also had radiation on a number of tumors that had popped up in his body. So there was, on his ribs, in his sinus cavity, on his arm, and he had a big one on his sternum. And we had joked that he should be a glow stick because of all of the radiation
So
that he'd
much
had.
radiation. Oh. So he obviously had a really good sense of humor. I'm going to ask you about him later and what he was like, but he obviously had a
Yeah,
bit
yeah,
of a sense of humor. Like, I know you well enough to know that you couldn't be with someone that didn't like having a giggle.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He was pretty funny. He was a bit of a trickster. You would
Yeah.
have liked him, Rosie.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Oh yeah. So I'd been doing a course at St John of God through this whole thing as well. A second one. Did I say this?
No, I didn't know that you did a second.
Oh, so just before I was medically discharged, I'd also started a second course at St John of God, which was the RODBT course. And that ran through for 6 months. And when it was about to wrap up, I was diagnosed with COVID, and I had to ring New South Wales Health, and I was in tears going, I can't stay here. Like, my partner, he's immunocompromised. I have COVID. What do I do? And they came and whisked me away that night. They took me to a hotel and left me there in quarantine for 2 weeks. And being that far away was so hard, because I was trying to manage my treatment and Tony's treatment from so far away. Like, I was trying to like deal with the cancer care clinic, because Tony and my stepson were effectively in an isolation period because they were close contacts.
Yeah.
And so Tony couldn't go and have radiation or anything like that if there were other people in the building. So he had to wait to the very end of the day to go and have any treatment or any blood tests or anything that needed to be done. So my stepson, he was looking after Tony through that whole time, and he did such a fantastic job, and I'll never forgive myself because he had to watch his dad, wasting away. And when I finally got out of quarantine, Tony wasn't able to walk. And we had to go back and see the specialist because the clinical trial had failed. And they sat there and had a bit of a round table, and they decided that there was a really old school treatment that was still available to him. And I think in hindsight, I feel like they should have just said, go home and spend time with your family.
Yeah.
So it was early October in 21, and he was admitted into hospital, and he had this dose of chemo, this really old school chemo, and it was brutal. It was 96 hours of straight chemo just being poured into him. Like it was crazy. He was so sick. He, lost all of his hair. He didn't want to eat. He was just so sick. And he was admitted, I think, for about 10 days before they released him. And they actually released him on my birthday. And I took him home and I got him out of the car into the wheelchair. And as I pushed him up the driveway, he passed out. And I called the ambos, and they came and they treated him. And I think it was 7 or 8 days later, Tony, I woke up and I tried to get Tony out of bed, and I sat him up and he passed out on me, and I laid him back down and he came to. And then I sat him up. This happened a couple of times. And then I just thought, oh, I don't know what to do here. So I called the paramedics, and they came and they took his blood pressure, and they were really concerned because it was so low. And they took him to hospital. I think it was about an hour and a half later. This doctor from A&E called, and she said, Cheryl, how long has Tony had this cough for? And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, he's got a really bad cough. Like, how long has he had this cough for? I said, he didn't have a cough when he left here. And she scoffed at me, and I just said, listen, I am the biggest dibber dobber when it comes to him. And if he had a cough, I would have fucking told you.
Yeah.
And later that day, he was admitted into ICU. He had fluid on his lungs and he had sepsis. And 36 hours after that, he passed away. Stop it.
You stop it. Sean.
So that was like,
Were you able to be
sorry,
there?
you go.
No, I was just to say, were you able to be there that whole time?
Yeah. So I was able to be there. Tony didn't want anyone in there. He didn't want anyone seeing him in the state that he was in. And there was a moment that made me laugh in the ICU where he was sitting there and looking out the room, and he said to me, where'd those fucking stormtroopers go? I said to him, what? And he said, where'd those fucking stormtroopers go? I said, I don't know. And he goes, well, go and find them. And I had to walk out into the ward and do a lap and come back. And I come back in and I said, I don't know. I must have been too slow. He goes, oh, fuck's sake.
Oh, go on.
You can put that in. You can
I'm
put that
going to.
story in
I'm
there.
going to.
I tell everybody.
Poor guy. So he's just up to his eyeballs on meds.
Oh, morphine. Morphine's
Yeah.
fantastic.
At what point after he went to the hospital did they tell you, like, when he's in
Yeah.
ICU? Yeah. So were you able to prepare for what was about to happen? Like, and I know that you said that he didn't want anyone there, but were his kids able to come in and say goodbye and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So the doctors and the nurses up there in ICU, they were so fantastic. They pulled me aside, um, and sat me down and just said, it's not looking great. This is what is going to happen. And I didn't really believe them at the start. I was like, no, no, that's not going to happen. Not at all. And I remember the doctor saying to me, just looked at me and he said, look at his heart rate. And it was at 136. I said, yeah, it's been at 136 since he's been in here. And he said, yeah, he's been in here overnight. He's been here for, 18 hours or something like that at this stage. And he said his heart is going to get really tired, and he is going to get tired. And I was like, okay. And I said, I know that he doesn't want anyone to see him like this. I said, but I can't not let his family come in. And the doctor said to me, he said, look, I would wait until he settles down, because at this stage, Tony was still really agitated. I wouldn't say he was coherent, but he was really agitated. He said, I would wait for him to settle down. He said, at some stage, he's going to slow down. And he said, we can give him a little bit more morphine. And maybe that's when you bring them in.
Yeah.
And so I waited until it was quite late at night. It was like 9:30 or something. And I brought the kids and his parents and his sisters in to see him. And we were all there when he passed.
Yeah. Did he know that everyone was like, did he know that the kids were there, or was he not really coherent at that time?
He wasn't, he did know,
Yeah.
because he told them
To find the stormtroopers.
to find the stormtroopers.
Sorry, I shouldn't joke.
They were looking for the Ewoks.
Oh, of course.
Silly. No, he did know that they were there, because he told them that he loved them.
Oh.
And the kids spent a little bit of time with him, and his parents and his sisters spent some time with him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's such an intense time. And when you're saying that, when the doctors were like, yeah, he will calm down soon, spending that last, 24, 48 hours in hospital with my dad, I remember the same thing. He just really agitated for a little while. And I left the hospital to go, because I know from previous experiences with family members that once they get put in Coffs Harbour Hospital, they get put in their own room. Not real good. And so I was like,
No.
okay, I'm going to go. My mum lives about 45 minutes from the hospital. So I said, right, I'm going to go. I'm going to grab everything we need for however long we're going to be here, like phone chargers and some clothes and that sort of stuff. And I'm going to come straight back. So I did the bolt. And by the time I'd gotten back, he was just so quiet and just in bed and didn't really move until he passed away, like a day and a half later. But it was so bizarre leaving him when he was so agitated and then coming back and he was just so quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that must be the morphine, right? Like just doing its job
Yeah.
to calm them down.
Yeah.
Mm.
The nurses were really fantastic. They actually said to me, like, you can climb in and have a cuddle with him. And so they got him and they dragged him to one side of the bed.
No.
And I leant over and I said, I'm just going to cuddle you. And he goes, He said to me, "Don't." I did it anyway.
Of course you did. You shush
Just to
now. Do
annoy
what
him
I
one
want.
last time.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. I just want to ask you what happened next, but let's just have a minute to.
So it was just this whirlwind after Tony passed away. Like, who thought I was going to be like 39 and planning the funeral for the man that I loved? And then, people come and visit you, and it's this weird thing where you kind of deal with their grief a little bit, because they come in and they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. He meant so much to me." And while that's really comforting, sometimes you just kind of go, "I just want 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, I just need 10 minutes." And I don't remember a lot of that period of time. I remember, again, putting on my mask and saying, these are the things that we need to do. And I involved Tony's kids and his parents quite a lot in the planning of the funeral. But I had put on that mask again where I was like, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And Tony's parents are Irish. One's Catholic and one's Protestant.
Oh.
And Tony was christened Catholic. And I had said to them, "Look, the police have offered to organise a chaplain for us. Would you be adverse to being this particular chaplain? She is not Catholic, but I've seen a funeral that she has done, and she was fantastic." And they agreed to that. So, I had put this mask on and organised everything, but it was just a bit of a haze. And I really only remember fragments of the actual funeral. I remember getting up to do the eulogy, and I remember the hearse not starting when they were about to drive him away, and me saying, "Well, this motherfucker's not going anywhere."
Yeah, it's him.
Oh no. And I remember watching him being driven down the guard of honor. I At the wake, I was like, it was like being in a pinball machine where I would turn around and somebody was there to talk to me or hug me or wanted to buy me a drink. And at some stage, I just said to somebody, I said, "Can you please walk me to the toilet, because I really need to go and I can't get there by myself."
Yeah.
And then one of my mates came up to me. I said, "Can you please take me home?" And I was so exhausted. I came home and I got wasted on sleeping tablets for 2 days. And I slept on the couch and I had reruns of Friends in the background. I actually didn't sleep in the bed for 6 months. I slept on the couch the whole time because I didn't want to wake up alone. Stop it.
You, John.
I didn't want to wake up alone in our bed. And, you know, you lose them 100 times a day. You lose them every time you wake up and every time you go to make coffee and you're not making a stupid latte with honey, or they're not asking you, "Oh, can you make me poached eggs?"
But you'd give anything to, right? Like,
Right.
yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm so fortunate that I had built a team prior to all of this that was so strong. I I made sure I connected with all of my doctors, my psychologist, my psychiatrist, my GP. They were all part of my medical team, and I had a really good connection with all of them. And I had this amazing, I have this amazing circle of friends
Yeah.
who, whether it was just them saying, let's go for a walk, or we're cooking dinner, come over, or, you know, I'm coming to you, because that's pretty much what saved me.
Yeah.
I I don't I actually don't think I'd be here without them.
Can I ask, and we didn't talk about this,
Go on.
did you have any more ideations after Tony passed away? Or
Yeah.
you did, yeah.
Yeah, they started to creep back in. You know, the grief was really overwhelming, and like my whole world was falling apart. Like I'd lost Tony, I'd lost, you know, the love of my life, and I lost my career, I'd lost my identity. And my world had started to shrink because I was starting to isolate. And I guess those same suicidal ideations that were there in the beginning had started to creep back in then. And I actually had to find a new psychiatrist in 2022 because my original psychiatrist, he passed away. And so I had to start that whole process again. And the first time I met him, I walked into his office and I sat down and I was like, hi, my name's Cheryl and this is my work trauma. I've done courses X, Y, and Z. My partner's passed away 8 months ago. And do you reckon you could get me a bed in your hospital, please? And I just remember him sitting there looking at me like, oh my God. He was so overwhelmed.
Not like the usual, like, hi, how you going? Yeah. Like just typical you. I'm just here to get shit done. Like,
Yeah, like I'm not here to fluff about.
no.
And he was really fantastic. He organized a 3-week, I call it a holiday, in hospital a few months later. And I made some amazing friends in there. People who I'll probably be in contact with for the rest of my life. And I shared a room with this person who had this connection back to Tony.
Oh.
And like we've become like best friends. And my stay with the hospital was for 3 weeks. And it didn't fix anything, but it just gave me 3 weeks to rest my brain and just to breathe.
Yeah.
You
Like a
know,
circuit breaker.
yeah, I didn't have to worry about a thing. I didn't have to feed myself. I didn't have to, they told me where to be. I went to group, I went to the gym, went for a walk around, we played, flip at night. I think the comm games were on, so we're all sitting there screaming at the telly at night, that sort of thing.
Was that a first responder program specifically, or just all different
So
people?
that was on the Xavier ward at Richmond St John of God.
Okay.
And the Xavier ward is a PTSD ward.
Okay.
It was originally for military, but over time, a lot of first responders and just people with PTSD from other traumas.
Yeah.
I know when I came home, there was a transition period because, I now had to do all of the adult things again. I had to look after my own meds and myself, and I just floated around. And I think coming back to the house was hard. I remember sitting in the driveway thinking, man, I don't want to go in there. That is the house of horrors. Like, I don't want to go back in. And I started this outpatient support group, which was supposed to help you transition. And I hated it. I bloody hated it. And I just said to the facilitator after about 2 weeks, like, I'm not coming back. Like, I just want to be on your STAIR program. Like, that's all I want. And I think that's really important, that you can advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't want to do something, just, it's okay to say no. Like, don't let people push you into things.
You're not going to benefit from it, right? You,
No,
it's okay for people to want you to try this and try that. But if you know that, what's the point? You're wasting your time.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's exactly how I look at it. And I think, like, you know, my journey is never going to be the same as anybody else's, and your journey will never be the same as anyone else's, right?
Yeah.
So I think you just have to be able to say that this is what I want, and these are the outcomes that I want to achieve. So I just think being able to advocate for yourself is really important.
Yeah. I agree with you.
What are we up to? Oh yeah, okay. At different stages, Rosie, I'm pretty sure you've had to do IMEs, right?
I literally had my last one last week.
Yeah. And, you know, at different stages throughout all of this clusterfuck, I had I had to do some IMEs, and like you, Rosie, I can present really well. And
And sorry, I'm just going to cut in. So for people that don't know and don't know the processes, an IME is an independent medical examination, and it's what we're talking about. It's a psychiatrist assessment of our capacity, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I always felt like I had to prove that I had a psychological injury. And the last IME I did was with this psychiatrist, and they wrote in their report something to the effect of, she's been able to take care of her ill partner, and I see no issues in her returning to work in the next 2 to 3 years. And I thought, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I didn't have a choice in this matter. Like, I couldn't believe it. Honestly, it was, I, I just wanted to hurt people.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you going to do? Not care for your partner that you love with all your heart? Like, he's just going to not do that.
Exactly right. I
Yeah.
really don't know what he was. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So what happened after that then? Because did you seek another one because of that? How did that affect everything for you in relation to like that policing and claim side of things? That would have fucked things up for you, for sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it could have fucked things up for me. And in the end, I actually didn't go down the path of work injury damages.
Oh, it was for that, was it?
I actually, yeah, I had an early settlement, an early mediation settlement meeting, and and the insurance company offered me some ridiculous amount that wasn't even 3 years' wages, and I just thought, oh, you've got to be kidding, right?
But after having that IME come back and read like that, you can't I can't imagine getting that and feeling good about myself. And because you feel like you have to prove your injury like I do, because we do present so well,
Yeah,
like what a mind fuck for you.
yeah, it really was. Like, I just sat there going, well, shit, maybe I can go back to work.
Yes.
And I was like, fuck, did I make a huge mistake? Like, going down the path of medical or retirement? Should I have just stayed? This
Yeah.
bloke reckons I can go back to work.
Yeah. So what happened from there? So you had that one and obviously didn't go down that path that you had the IME for. What have you been doing since then? Like, how did you go when Tony passed with your PTSD and you had your inpatient, and then after that, when you got home, how was that period?
It was this weird, it was this state where I just sort of, I don't know, it was like I was just floating a lot. It was like I just existed. I
Yeah.
wasn't really doing anything productive. I wasn't really, you know, I just was there. And my psych sessions were sort of halfway between PTSD and then halfway between grief.
Yeah.
And it, it was probably around here where my stepdaughter and I, our relationship became really strained. And that was due to us just being different people and our grief process being really different. But we've started to reconnect, and it's been really nice to have her back in my life. But I made a move out of Sydney. I moved down the South Coast for a period of time. It wasn't long, but I loved it down there. Like, it was me and the dogs down by the beach. And it was like what my soul needed. Um, there were a few challenges moving down there because I have some friends down there, but not a lot. So my world got small again.
Yeah.
And so I had to work out a way to try and meet some people. So I started playing sport and I met some people while I was walking the dogs. And then the last 6 to 12 months, something has happened in my brain. I don't really know what it is. But while I was down there, it was like I could start seeing a future that I wanted for myself. And so I signed up for this communications course to help me with public speaking. And I also enrolled in a diploma of mental health. And ideally, I want these two things to come together so that I can advocate for carers of terminally ill and long-term ill patients, because I just found that there was like services there that were available to Tony, but there was nothing for us as his carers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Such a beautiful thing.
I have noticed that there is some research going into the mental health of carers with some of the universities around the place. So I think there's a bit of a movement in that space.
Yeah. Yeah. I've read a couple
Yeah.
of books actually. I feel like one of them was maybe called Overwhelmed or something like that. And they definitely spoke to carers, not only of ill people, but children with disabilities or just elderly parents and that sort of thing. And their mental health is obviously deeply affected by that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how are you
Yeah.
going with your diploma?
I'm learning how to learn again.
Yeah. Oh my
So
gosh.
it's so hard. Oh my God.
Yeah. Your brain's different, right? Like it actually is different, but learning how to use the new brain.
Oh, oh my God. I need training wheels.
Yeah.
I need training wheels. Um, I started doing the communications course, and they say this thing, you'll worry less sorry, you'll worry less when you realize that people don't think about you as much as you think they do.
Yeah.
And so at some stage I thought to myself, I'm gonna create this character, right? And this character, she is gonna be like open and honest and, really raw. And then I just needed to find somebody who was a neutral ear. And one day I met this person and we started chatting. I thought, I'm never going to see this person again. So let's see how this character goes. And we started with a normal small talk, like, oh, blah, blah, blah. Where'd you grow up? Whatever. And the conversation turned to, like, what do you do? And I was like, oh, this is my opportunity, right? So I just said, you know what? I was in the police, and 5 years ago, I was medically retired with PTSD. And there was no judgment from that person. And I was like, well, that's weird. That's new.
Mm.
And the conversation continued on for a bit. And it came to Tony, and they said to me, oh, are you meeting him here? And again, I thought, oh, okay. And I just said, well, actually, he passed away a while ago, and he passed away from cancer. And in that moment, that person, they showed me so much empathy. And it wasn't, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like, must be so hard for you. It was, tell me about him. And I thought, far out, this is wild.
Yeah.
I've never been this person, right? And again, I still thought, like, no, I'm not going to see this person again. Like, what does it matter? Like, what does it matter? But long story short, I did end up catching up with them. And when I caught up with them, they actually said to me, since we met and you told me about your psychological injury, I actually went sort of counselling myself for an incident that I was involved in. And I think I said something really profound to them, like, well, that's not good that you were involved in that incident, but I think it's really cool that you've gone and found somebody to talk to. And I'm really fucking proud of you, And I think from that little experiment, it just showed me that being able to communicate and hold space for somebody can have such an impact that you might not ever see. So just be generous with, like, your time and your words.
Your time is the most valuable thing that you can ever give another person. And I know that you, of course, would know that more than most people.
Yeah,
A lot of people don't understand it, how
yeah,
valuable that is for you to give someone your actual time to be.
yeah,
Means so
yeah,
much, right?
yeah. It really does. It really does.
Have you given that honest and open character of yours a name? Because I know you love naming things.
She hasn't got a name yet. Maybe you can think of one for her.
I might do that.
That can be your task.
Yeah.
Um, when I moved back to Sydney, I came back with heaps more confidence, and I finished renovating the house that Tony and I lived in, and it is still really hard to be in this house. And the grief is still here for sure. And every day it looks really different. Like, some days I'll look at a photo and I'll turn to water, and other days I'll like be getting dressed. And the other day I was like putting on a pair of blue jeans, and I thought of this time when Tony said to me, like, oh, you can make any idiot believe anything if you say it with conviction. And I was like, yeah, what a bunch of dum-dums. And 10 minutes later he said, vegans shouldn't be wearing blue jeans. And I looked at him and I was like, why? He goes, because the dye for blue jeans comes from blue whales. And I looked at him and I go, really? Yeah. And the side eye that I got. So those memories will come flooding back, and I'll just sit there in fits of laughter, or I'll have to mow the lawn and I'll mow the lawn furiously because I think, fuck you and this stupid lawn that I've now got to mow because you're not fucking here to do it.
Yeah. Yes, I can imagine. Can you tell us about Tony? Because I think it's really important to talk about people because they stay with us a bit longer, don't they? It's when you stop talking about them
Oh,
and
yeah.
remembering them that they almost die all over again.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
God damn it, Rosie.
You can take. I've got my tissue ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
What
Okay,
did
let
you
me
what
get
did
one.
you what was the thing that started the spark for you with him?
Oh, to be honest with you, I didn't like Tony when I first met him. I really didn't. And I tell everybody this story. I met him for the very first time. I was in it was in my first 4 weeks out of Goulburn because I was still 3 up. And we had gone to his house that he was living at the time to because he wanted something fixed. And one of the guys that I was working with was a chippy. And we went around there and they introduced me to him. And I was like, oh, hi, how you going? And he grunted at me and I thought, oh my God, who is this guy? Like, whatever, mate. Like, I'm never going to see you again. I don't care. And then I saw he had a dog and I was like, oh, what's your dog's name? He told me and I said, oh, can I pat it? And he goes, whatever you want. Like, mm, okay then. So I walked outside, patted the dog, and then the boys were ready to leave. So I walked, I was like, oh, it was really nice meeting you, whatever, whatever. And then 2 weeks later, I walked into the supervisor's office and here he is sitting in the supervisor's chair. And I thought, are you kidding me? This guy.
This guy.
And I remember it was probably 12 months before I thought, oh, you're an all right kind of human. You're not so bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was pretty funny. Like, he could make me like belly laugh every day. He was such a good dad to his kids. He'd give them everything. He he was a he was always a bit of a shit stirrer at work. He used to like to stir up everybody in the muster room and then just walk away and leave you all bickering amongst yourselves.
Fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Um, he was a pretty good leader. His his whole motto was always that if you look after your troops, they'll look after you. And I think that's always sort of stuck with me. But yeah, he was also the guy that everybody came to when they had an issue.
What about at home? How was he at home? Did he cook for you? Is he a good cook?
Yeah, he was a good cook. He was a good cook, but he didn't like to cook all that much,
Okay.
which was annoying
Yeah, because
then I had to cook.
Yeah. What was the thing that you loved doing most with him?
I loved traveling with him. We went on some really great road trips. Like I said, we did that trip down the Great Ocean Road, and then we did one over in WA, which was fantastic. And we just did, the southwest coast of WA and had a blast.
Yeah. You recently did a trip to Ireland, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I went over and, like I said earlier, that's where Tony's family is from. And so I got to meet, oh God, everybody, all of his aunties and uncles and his cousins. And that's the first time. That's the first time I've actually been to Europe or the UK, and it was really, really beautiful. Like they like aggressively dragged me into their family, right?
I love
And
that. I love that description so much. was like, I can just see
It
them like
was
pulling at your
there was
arms, like,
yeah,
come be with us.
that's exactly what it was like. It was there was nothing gentle about it. That it was just like, you belong to us now. And so that was a really beautiful thing. And um then I traveled around by myself for a couple of weeks, and that trip gave me a lot of confidence coming back home. But it was really hard to do without Tony because it was something that we had planned to do together.
Yeah.
But also that that trip also, opened up my world again, because it just made that the world a little bit bigger from, when you're isolated and it gets smaller. So, now you've let a few more people into that circle.
I was gonna say, I think I know when I left the cops, I fucking hated everyone. Like all the people because and looking back now, of course I did, because everyone that I dealt with was just either on their worst day or that 1% of society that you spend 99% of your time with, like just the scum of the earth most of the time. And when I started to open up a little bit more and not have to see those people as much, it's like you said, your world just opens up that little bit more and little bit more, and you realize, oh, hang on,
Yeah.
there's really nice people out there. Isn't it wild?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, why have I never met these people before?
Where have you been? Oh, that's right. I was stuck in a police
Yeah.
station. You don't come to those places.
Yeah.
Like,
That's exactly right. And I think, you know, I can I can see the cliche. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes it's like sometimes some days it's a bit dimmer. Some days it's like a fucking supernova. And I think, well, I did this thing with my psychologist not long ago where we sat there and we compared we compared like me 5 years ago, where I was that girl crying on the floor, to where I am now. And like, I am so, so proud of myself for how far I have come and how hard I've worked to get back to here. And I might not be exactly where I want to be right now, but like, I will do everything to get there.
yeah, you should be so
Yeah.
proud. I don't think I know a more resilient person. I don't, I'm sure you've broken down so many times over the last 5 years, but to go and do that trip to Europe by yourself to meet his family, like that's incredible. I could not imagine doing something like that, but I just think you're probably the most phenomenal woman I've ever met. Just how
Well,
you
thank you.
just how you do, how I deal how you move through your life and just keep going, and it's a testament to you being such a strong advocate for yourself as well, I think, and being so active and informed into your own recovery and your own journey. I
Mm.
think, you could just sit there and you could have sat there after he passed away and been a poor me. And you went and did an inpatient program. Like, that's incredible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
And you'll get to wherever you want to be. You're going to get there because it's just the person you are. Like, you're going to get there. I know it.
Yeah. Hopefully soon, right?
Yeah. Well, enjoy the journey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cheungy, I don't know if I've done this recently, but I usually ask people for advice because when you go through things, you know, sometimes it's nice, like you said, you pick up a little nugget from, it could be a therapist or it could be someone else. So, what is your learning or a piece of advice for people that might be struggling at the moment with anything really?
Yeah, okay. I just think for anyone out there who is struggling, like it took me a long time to understand the notion that suicide is a permanent solution to a short-term problem. And it doesn't feel like a short-term problem in that moment, but there are people who love you and they need you. I promise that it's going to get better and that you're not alone. And like I've been there where the hole is so deep and dark and the weight of the world is suffocating. But just hold on for tomorrow because you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And it might just be a bit brighter. So just hold on.
You're such a wonderful human, and I am just so blessed to be able to call you a friend of mine. And even though we always like, when are we going to get together? We will. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you've shared with people, because I know you and I both feel the same way, that you share these things so other people feel comfort or validation, or just that they're not the only ones having a shit time right now. And thank you for being so generous and vulnerable, and for sharing about Tony. Just sounds like, and I've heard, from our mutual friend, um, he was an amazing man. So thank you so much for sharing that experience and everything that you've been
Thank,
through.
thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Rosie, and giving me a platform to share and
Yeah,
asking about Tony.
yeah. I really wanted to have you on, and I just never wanted to ask. So I'm so glad that you brought it up. Thank you, Cheungy. I love you so much.
Thanks, Rosie. Love you.
Just before we wrap up, I'd like to mention Myeloma Australia and suggest supporting them by making a donation. Myeloma Australia is Australia's only dedicated myeloma charity. They receive no government funding. All of their services are free of charge via their specialist myeloma support nurses, who provide up-to-date information and caring support through their support line, support groups, publications, and seminars. Cheungy says that they were really good to her and Tony, and she continues to support the charity. As we discussed, this disease is incurable, and I'm sure that they would be very appreciative of any donations they can get to support families like Cheryl and Tony. I'll pop the link to donate in the show notes under where you can find Cheryl. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for listening. See you next week. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you have, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss any new ones. We release fresh content every Tuesday. And while you're there, take a moment to leave us a review. I would genuinely appreciate your thoughts. Don't forget to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook at Tactical Yoga Australia, and share this episode with your friends, family, and workmates to spread inspiration. Your support means the world. My name is Rosie Skeen. Join me again next week for another empowering and positive episode of Triumph Beyond Trauma. Until then, be kind to your mind and trust in the magic of your consistent and positive efforts. Triumph beyond your trauma is closer than you think. Have the best week.